My name is Greg Dykhouse, and I'm a high school history teacher at Black River Public School in Holland, Michigan. And for the past academic year, in addition to teaching virtually, in person, and a combination of the two, I have been participating in a project here locally called Digitally Writing New Histories. And this is a program that's been sponsored by a number of groups, including the Library of Congress with its Teaching with Primary Sources initiative and the Michigan Council for the Social Studies. This project, Digitally Writing New Histories, considered the use of primary sources and identified numerous useful disciplinary and technological literacies to support student instruction. The challenge for all of the participants, teachers in elementary and secondary instruction, was how to fuse together these targets within grade level units and lessons. And what I'm going to share with you is my attempt to combine what we've worked with for the past year. So I hope you enjoy this effort. Let's see how we do. Return with me to a world of about 100 years ago. We will use a number of photographs to set the scene. The city that we're going to visit is in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Calumet, and we will meet a place and people, and we will see numerous possibilities. In the images that I share with you, you'll see a number of things. You see copper miners descending into the mine to begin their work. In the middle here, you see a machine known as the Widowmaker, a one-man drill that was developed. This technology helped management a great deal because fewer workers could do more work with a one-man drill. However, it was very dangerous for it to be operated by one person. And then on the right you see copper wiring. Over 100 years ago, electricity is discovered, but electricity will not go anywhere without proper wiring. And it turns out that copper will allow electricity to take off because of copper's malleability and functionality into shaping into very small wiring. And so this is how copper is going to be used a little more than 100 years ago to help propel the advent of electricity. Also up in Calumet, we see a combination of living conditions. On the left, you see the manager for the Calumet Hecula copper mine, Mr. James McNaughton. And the company that he ran was the world's largest copper mining company. To the right, you'll see an image of a housewife preparing pasties for her husband and family as they head into the mines. Much more modest lifestyle than the one that Mr. McNaughton is accustomed to. We see too the differences in housing. In the neighboring town of Larium, a lot of the management will live in residents that resemble what you see on the left. Workers to the mines live in company housing, which at the time might have been viewed as something rather nice, but yet very modest in the furnishings. A family would be able to maintain company housing as long as they followed the dictates of the company. But when they began to challenge those and or perhaps even decide to work elsewhere, they would lose this company housing. So the company housing was contingent on agreeing to work in the copper mines. We also see a great variety in people living in the UP. A great diversity in terms of ethnicity, a great diversity in terms of culture, people coming to the UP from Scandinavia, from Southern Europe, Italy, from Eastern Europe. In the middle you see a synagogue, and the people that lived in the UP at this time were largely immigrants coming from different locations around Europe to find work in mining. To the left, you see the Truro pub, and at some point after 1900, workers begin to resist and challenge the management, and you see workers here beginning to march and protest to demand better working conditions. Amazingly, a lot of these efforts were led by the females in households. And to the right, you see a portrait of Anna Klobuchar Clements, also known as Big Annie, who plays a big role in working for improved working conditions in the UP. Protesters were willing to demonstrate in winter conditions, which you see in the left, and some of the propaganda placards and posters in Unity is Strength, work that's created and displayed by the workers. The protesting had a horrible crescendo on Christmas Eve in 1913. It seems that many of the workers gathered in the location known as the Italian Hall to celebrate Christmas. And the event that happened on this day is still shrouded in some mystery. No one knows quite for sure what happened, but a stampede out of the hall to the front door occurred, perhaps because someone may have yelled fire, or there was thought of a fire in the building. And the result was 70-some people losing their lives in this scurry to escape the building. And most of the deaths were young children. You see a funeral procession in the right picture. You see numerous youth toe-tagged after they had died, and then you see images of children's coffins along the right. Some horrible footage. What this event really represented was the largest mining disaster ever in the state of Michigan, and it was a disaster that it did not occur underground, but rather above ground, due to this storming out of the Italian Hall. All of these pictures combine and come together because of the presence of copper. And when you look at these photographs from about 100 years ago, we can start to try to tell a story of history, a narrative of history. And we can formulate what we would call a driving question. How did copper contribute to the age of modern revolution? Copper contributes to modernity in a number of ways. First of all, it is copper that really sparks the industrial age. Again, when electricity is discovered, it is the availability of copper to bring electricity all over the place. And so copper plays a big role beginning with the invention of electricity. Copper also seems to intensify divisions among various socioeconomic classes. It pits management of the copper mine against the workers in Calumet, and it will bring animosity between these groups. Copper also fosters forms of xenophobia, hatred and discrimination against immigrants. We see that on display in Calumet. And copper will eventually usher in a revolution for advocacy and fighting for individual rights. We will see women will soon get the right to vote, even more than just mere protesting. Workers will gain better rights and working conditions, as will immigrants. All of these things come together in Calumet, Michigan, which was known as Paris on Mars, because of the fine displays that the copper industry brought to the area. And it had the distinction also of having more churches per capita than any other town in America. Today, when you visit Calumet, it's hard to imagine the presence that this town had 100 years ago. The result of the presence of copper is a very interesting claim. The events from a century ago, Calumet's 1913 to 1914 copper mine strike, coalesced around the presence of copper, ultimately shaping the world of today with its acceleration, globalization, and new understandings of individual rights. This year, in fact for the next 2 academic years, we have a unique opportunity to consider this world of 100 years ago. The Michigan Humanities Council has identified as its Great Michigan Read a work of historical fiction by Mary Doria Russell. The work is entitled The Women of the Copper Country. And in reading this work of historical fiction, students can enter the past in a very substantive way. The task of having a student read a major work cover to cover is not an easy task, but it's a very important task, I think. And as teachers, we want to take time to model and present techniques to help students read a work cover to cover. And the work need not be historical fiction, but it could be a work of nonfiction as well. And I share with you some strategies that we have found effective in teaching kids to read a work cover to cover. They're not going to remember every detail from a book, but these strategies, I think, can help kids work with a book and perhaps give them confidence to pick up another book when they're done with this one. The strategies are to, within each chapter, to suggest perhaps taking out target vocabulary that the students themselves find useful, important, or new, and have kids say something about those terms. Another strategy would be to encourage them to take out an interesting sentence or phrase and explain a little bit why they find this sentence or this passage interesting. Have students make connections to an idea or an event that they read about in a chapter. Perhaps students have visited Calumet, or perhaps students have visited a mine, and have them elaborate in writing a little bit about this connection. Some students like to just offer a general summary. What do readers need to know from this chapter or from this section? What is the main idea? And then, of course, any additional thoughts that students might have. The task is not to have kids do all of these things for each chapter or section, but to have them pick one of these approaches so that they can record and note the information that they find interesting. And Teachers can reinforce this through discussion in class or through summary or through bringing ideas up to the board and talking about them. But after a period of time, after students have worked their way through the book, they will find that they have a nice collection of ideas about a book. And it's not ideas that have been given to them by the teacher, but rather the students themselves have constructed this meaning from the target reading. And what's particularly interesting with this book is we have the genre of historical fiction, but with it we can have kids work with the photography that they find in various archives. Such as the photographs that you saw here at the beginning. And they can combine the genre of historical fiction with what we might call archival fact, and again construct meaning from the past. This is a unique aspect of this project. What do they do with all of this material that they've combined? We encourage kids to take the material and construct websites. And there's a number of platforms that are very useful for this project, whether it be Google Sites or Weebly or Wix or any number of platforms. But we ask students to design a website. And we've done this for a number of years at our school, and we find that for the most part kids are doing this sort of work for the first time. All kids have read, all kids have worked with technology, but maybe kids have not read a substantive work of nonfiction or fiction and noted it, and they may perhaps have not made a website. And we find that kids are doing both of these things for the first time. And on the website, we provide kids with a rubric or a template of what we like to see. We'd like to see them put their information, their note-taking on websites. We call this good content. We'd like them to take good content from the book. We encourage them to find visuals that might match or reflect what they've read, and organize it well. We ask kids to display historical thinking skills at some place on the website, and that would include what we call a driving question. That would include research that they've done, their note-taking from the book. That would include formulating a strong argument statement. What is the argument or what is the position of this book? And we model how this is done through establishing a claim, a counterclaim, and then a listing of specific evidence. And then they'll use evidence to support their argument. Kids also will use some of the following discourse. They will explain what we mean by change over time or continuity over time and how that might apply to the book. They may choose to work with causation, explain what that is and show how that's relevant to this story. Contextualization, again, explain this term, what are the frames in which we see this episode, and apply that to the reading. Or perhaps compare and contrast. Take the story of Calumet, Michigan, and compare it or contrast it to another episode in history from another place and time. Historical thinking skills. All of these are skills that are part of different literacy discourse. It could be the advanced placement program with its AP history targets identified. We also ask kids to make connections to other topics and then provide a very short works cited page, all on a platform. These items do take a little bit of time, but students have displayed wonderful work over the years, and I've collected over the 6 or 7 years hundreds of examples of student websites, and when we look at them, work that basically high school freshmen are doing, it's really impressive what they have. And we like the website because you know what happens with typical poster projects. When kids take their information, they put it on a poster. We all know what happens to that material at the end of the period. It gets kind of wadded up and thrown away. But websites are very portable, and students are able to use these. These have some permanence to them, and kids can edit them over time and continue to show them, perhaps even share them with college or university admissions officers to give evidence to their ability to read books and to work with technology. We had a really good experience in March of 2019. At the time, the students were reading a book by Mona Hanna-Attisha, What the Eyes Don't See, the New York Times bestseller, one of the books of the year, notable books of the year about the Flint water crisis. And as the students read the book, took their notes, and constructed their websites, we had the opportunity to take this material on the road. The Holland Symphony Orchestra had a family concert called HSO and H2O. The music that was played for that concert was connected to water, but the symphony invited different nonprofit groups and organizations to set up some displays that connected to water. And so what our students did was we brought in Chromebooks, and we displayed the various websites that students did, and we adorned tables with a few more decorations. And as people came in for the concert, our students basically had discussions with the people, the patrons, about water and about the Flint water crisis. And basically the students would pull the visitors over and say, let me tell you what you need to know about the Flint water crisis and why this is important. And it was very impressive what ninth graders could do after reading a book, displaying their information with technology, and then sharing this information publicly in Holland. Students have done this sort of work with the first 3 target books. We began this approach with a book called World Without Fish by best-selling author Mark Kurlansky. And students read the book, noted the chapters, and then built websites that shared their material. For a couple of years, students worked with the book What the Eyes Don't See. This past year, we decided to work with a book that was promoted by Hope College and its Great Read Project, In the Heart of the Sea, which is the historical experience that inspired the novel Moby Dick. And kids again displayed very fine websites with all of the requirements. And then this year, the project will be to consider this book about Calumet, Michigan, the women of the copper country, that you see on the right. Analytical skills are not the easiest things for students to master initially. And we have great opportunity with the book about copper as we ask kids to take what they find from historical fiction and then work with resources that perhaps share photographs of the scene, primary sources. And all of the photographs that you saw came from the Michigan Technological University's collection of Copper County. And students would have the opportunity to look at this collection and then select photographs that they can connect to different events in the book. And then we can have kids sort of go through the process of analyzing. And there's a number of collections which provide steps or an approach on how you analyze primary sources. The Teaching Primary Sources from the Library of Congress gives us a very useful basic format. Some of the questions that you see along the left here. What is this object about? Why do you think the object was created? Whose story is being told? Whose story is absent? And as students apply these questions to different primary sources, basically they are analyzing an object, and they're getting at a point of view. Another useful format for questions comes from the University of Southern California, from their archival collection. And again, the questions are different, but you can kind of see the similarity that they have. Who is the author or creator of a particular source? What biases or assumptions may have influenced the author or creator? Who is the intended audience? All of these are questions that historians will use to try to understand the past, to try to understand objects from the past. And so students, in answering these questions, they're learning analytical skills and the actual work that historians do. And you could kind of practice this approach with a couple of photographs here. I did identify the woman on the left, but you could practice with students. You could put this photograph in front of them, and you could say, what does this object appear to be about? And perhaps they'll say, well, you have a picture of a woman who appears to be dressed in a more formal way. Hair is neatly presented. She is embracing or draped with an American flag to show perhaps patriotism. Why do you think this was created? Whose story is being told? Whose story is absent? And you allow kids to analyze it, and then of course they would recognize this woman from the book that they read of Annie Clement. And the photograph here presents her in such a way that she is very patriotic in her advocacy for the rights of all people. The United States should not be a country that guarantees rights or advocates rights for a few people, but rather it advocates for the rights of all people. And that's what she does, in fact, in Calumet. We could do a similar thing with a photograph on the right, which is a very different tone. Perhaps few students have been to a cemetery burial, and I doubt that any students have really been to a cemetery burial that looks like what's presented on the right. Numerous coffins, many people posing, looking at the photographer. Very solemn event. What do you observe? What do you think? What do you wonder? What's going on there? And of course, this would be the ceremony proceedings for the young children who died at the Italian Hall in 1913. And again, this event is mentioned also in the book. Other sources which use this analytical literacy, this disciplinary literacy, Harvard College Writing Center, in its brief guide to writing history papers, goes through very similar questions that the Library of Congress uses and that Southern Cal uses. And then the last analysis I'll share with you is one of vertical integration. Our ninth graders, hopefully in years to come, will take advanced placement courses. And the College Board, with its AP history program, part of their requirements is having students work and develop their analytical skills. And they have a whole format here. And answering these questions helps us approach the primary sources. So what you see here, a lot of things are brought together, right? Primary sources and the literacies of disciplinary study, how historians actually do their work and how they do their analysis, the ability to use technology, archives, and websites to share information. And students can hone these skills over time in this project of reading Women of the Copper Country for the coming year. Copper, though, is not limited to this one episode, and copper certainly is something that's much older than 100 years. And our students consider this aspect of copper as well. In ninth grade, we work with a big history project, a big history approach in which we look at history over billions of years. And these literacies that we've worked with are part of the Big History Project, and they're part of the Online Educational Resource Project, the OER project. And they're embedded in just about everything that's done with its World History program and its Big History program. And what does that look like? Well, in Big History, it really opens the imagination for students. If you consider copper, if each of us had a little bit of copper in our hand and we were holding that, we would feel some weight. And this element would look like a stone or a rock, and we might not think much is there, but it's really interesting. The atomic structure of copper, there's a lot of movement going on. There's electrons moving around, and there's actually a great deal of movement going on in copper. Copper, consists of energy and matter. It's a sophisticated matter, but it's energy and matter. And all energy and all matter that's around us. The understanding that we have of energy and matter is all of this originated at some point. And the point that we identify today, our understanding of cosmology and the universe, is all of this originated in an event we call the Big Bang. The Big Bang gave us our early forms of energy, early forms of matter. And with that moment in history, energy is released and simple matter is released. And then some interesting things begin to happen. Energy and matter combine to form really the next new thing in the story of our universe. Stars. Stars are born, they live, and they die. We see stars at night, but they're much more than just these beautiful little lights in the sky. Stars are responsible for manufacturing our chemical elements. As stars grow, they fuse together with more pressure and more heat the early elements that we see on the periodic table. And when they fuse and they get to a point where they get to element number 26, which is lead, stars then will collapse on themselves. They're just so hot, and there's so much pressure there, and stars eventually will explode. And this pressure creates higher temperatures and more pressure. And then all the other chemical elements that follow number 26 will form under this temperature and this pressure. And that would include copper. Copper is number 29 on the periodic table, but copper can only come from one place. Copper is manufactured from an exploding star, because that's the only thing that gets so hot and there's so much pressure. And copper then is thrusted out into the universe. And then eventually copper will combine with other forces of gravity and new stars. And copper will be brought into the next new thing in the story of our universe, planets. Through accretion, copper will be brought with gravity and form into planets, including Earth. And copper does interesting things on our planet. When Earth was early and molten, copper would probably prefer to sink to the core. But there are different forces which bring copper and move copper around. Plate tectonics and volcanoes and other pressures will bring copper to the surface of our planet and will solidify there. And it makes itself available for discovery. And so copper has this interesting story in the early formation of our planet. Copper, too, has a very important function in our own biology. All of us contain traces of copper in our system. And it's probably fair to say that without copper, we would not be here as a species. That's one of the things that makes up our biology. And so, stars have manufactured this thing that we need in our own biology. But it's not just part of our biology, but it becomes part of early human society and classical civilization. Copper is discovered to have great use, perhaps as currency, perhaps as weapons, because you don't need much force to form copper into a useful weapon. Perhaps in religious artifacts and artistic displays. Copper plays a beautiful role in early human societies and classical civilizations. In fact, so many museums will display copper in this way, from Asia to Africa to the Americas. Copper is on display and part of early human societies. And then, of course, in the last couple hundred years, and really in particular around 1900, copper takes on a new role to bring about the modern revolutions with electricity. And then even when we look into the future, if the future is going to hold artificial intelligence and AI, we would anticipate that copper would play a big role in future technologies and in future societies because of what it can do with technology. And all of these stories, I think young learners of history find fascinating. They can take what they learn from Calumet, Michigan, and they begin to see the importance of copper and the use of copper just within human society in so many ways. And museums are very ready to share these stories of copper. And I'm going to end today with one that connects locally. I think when we talk about things in history, so much of what we talk about can be very abstract. But when students are able to see all of this more locally or a part of their world, it starts to bring on a new importance. And here in Holland, Michigan, in the Holland Museum, I think perhaps the oldest item that is on display and that would be in the Holland Museum's collection is a copper spear point, which originated from the UP. But early Native Americans would take this material, and this particular object found its way through trade and use down to West Michigan, and is thousands of years old and on display for young students to see. And when they see this in the Holland Museum, they can also understand that it had a different use later in history, around 1900. Copper fuses and fuels the industrial age. It plays such a big role in how socioeconomic groups understand each other. It plays such a big role in how we understand immigrants. And of course, it goes a long way into identifying and guaranteeing more human rights, the human rights that we see of the 20th century. Copper indeed has a big history. So the purpose of the project was to consider primary sources in all of their forms, along with different literacies of history and literacies of technology, and sort of set a table for possibilities for teachers to work with. The material that you've considered is perhaps most readily at home in high school, but this approach can be used very effectively in middle school and perhaps even among ambitious elementary teachers. The sources that I shared with you, all of the photographs that you saw, except for the last one, come from the Michigan Tech collection. But I did check out the Library of Congress, and they too have wonderful photographs on Calumet and the copper mining. The Grand Rapids Public Museum does as well. They're very excited to work with teachers I know here locally. And then, of course, when you're working with analyzing primary sources, the resources that I brought to your attention would be the material from the College Board and the AP History program, the University of Southern California, Harvard College, and Teaching Primary Sources with the Library of Congress. If you have questions, and I have questions myself, but if you would like to talk further about how this sort of project, copper, over the centuries, over the millennia, over billions of years, can be part of instruction, and how copper and similar topics can connect to the different literacies, I would welcome an opportunity to talk with you and consider how you too can build a unit in lessons which would include this sort of approach. I thank you for your attention.